So Jennifer and I are really going to talk a little bit about the heart of the report that's at center here in this webinar, the state of the Hill Country. And to do that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that you don't have to look at us, but can instead look at some beautiful images of the Texas Hill Country. And let's see here. Share screen. So I want to start by saying thank you all so much for joining us today, for your interest in the Hill Country and your interest in the Texas Hill Country Conservation Network. As Emily mentioned, this report really is a product of the Texas Hill Country Conservation Network. We are a coalition of dozens of nonprofits, agencies, universities, private landowners, and stakeholders who are working together to protect the natural resources and character of the Texas Hill Country. Those partners came together more than 5 years ago in recognition of the fact that by collaborating, we can be more impactful in preserving places like these for future generations. We'd ask that whenever you're quoting or writing stories about this report, that you talk about it as a product of the Texas Hill Country Conservation Network. And really, we couldn't have written this report without the support of the Cynthia and George Mitchell Foundation and numerous other private foundations and even national foundations that support this important work. So the purpose of this project was really to establish a shared baseline for gauging the impact of our work and for telling the story of change in the Texas Hill Country. As Emily mentioned, and as we all know well, the Hill Country is growing at an incredible rate. And we want to be able to tell the story about how that growth is impacting things like our pristine rivers or our beautiful open spaces and working ranch lands, our view of the stars at night. And so this report is the first in what we hope will be a recurring effort to measure change over time and to measure the impact of the conservation partners who are behind this effort. So I would be remiss if I didn't start with a huge note of gratitude to the dozens of individuals and organizations who were really a part of the inspiration, the writing of this report, the selection of the metrics that we worked on, the evaluation and analysis that was required to go into really creating an impactful story. So thank you all so much. Many of these contributors are here on the webinar today. So we came together several years ago and selected 8 key metrics that we really feel tell the story of change in our region. As you all know, the Texas Hill Country is an incredibly special place. The Hill Country has the headwaters of 12 of Texas's rivers. It represents the intersection of half of the state's ecoregions, and it's a region that's growing at an incredible pace. We today are really going to focus on 4 of these metrics. But if you have questions about our night skies or our public investment in conservation, I would encourage you, don't feel constrained to the metrics that we're going to talk about in your question and answer. So I think it makes perfect sense to start with growth. Specifically, growth in the unincorporated areas of our region and population growth over time. The fundamental takeaway of this report is that our region is growing at an unprecedented rate, and this first metric really helps to measure that change. We are expecting to double the population of the Texas Hill Country in the next 30 to 35 years or so. And as much as we would like to think that the additional millions of people that are coming to our region are going to come to downtown San Antonio and Austin, that simply isn't the case. We are seeing immense pressure in terms of growth and development outside of the incorporated areas of our region. That new population, the new rooftops and subdivisions and commercial developments and schools and roads that come along with growth really represent just a fraction of the change that's happening on the landscape. Population growth in our unincorporated areas in particular means the loss of family ranching lands and wildlife habitat. Texas is losing ranch and wildlife lands faster than any other state in the country. And that rate of change is happening faster here in the Hill Country than in most other places in the state. Population growth in unincorporated areas also means that we're seeing more demands on traditional resources. It means more straws heading into our aquifers. It means more wastewater that needs to be treated and disposed of, or if we can find a way to reuse and make that a resource in our region. And so there are a myriad of challenges associated with this metric. Texas is also unique in that it is the only state in the country that doesn't afford counties the ability to plan for and manage growth. So outside of incorporated areas, we really don't have many tools to ensure that we're not seeing incompatible land uses coming in next to each other, to ensure that we're protecting water resources and maintaining habitat and wildlife resources as much as possible. So this is really the first story that underpins all of the others that follow in the metrics report. The second that I want to talk about just briefly before we turn to the story of our water resources is the story of land conservation in the Texas Hill Country. So alongside development comes an incredible rate of the increase in impervious cover. All those new rooftops and roadways and sidewalks and driveways that come with population growth mean more pavement, mean impacts to the health of our lands in their ability to slow and sink water resources. In another report that was commissioned by the Hill Country Alliance, we found that between 2000 and 2010, the Hill Country added 50,000 acres of impervious land. So we know that new population means new impervious cover. It's critically important that as a region, we are protecting lands in their native state just as quickly as we are developing them. And so we really are seeking with these two metrics to understand the change in impervious cover and developed land in our region and the rate of increase in conservation lands. The Hill Country and the state of Texas is a private land state. 95% of the land in the Texas Hill Country is in private ownership. And the areas in green that you see on this map represent the incredible generosity and stewardship of willing landowners interested in putting protective measures in place on their properties, in addition to the public lands that have been conserved, the parks, whether they be city, county, or state run. So we've seen some incredible successes, but really we need to accelerate the rate of land conservation if we want to keep pace with the development we're seeing. What I love most about this report is that many of our metrics can be broken down by a county level. And the Hill Country, for the Hill Country Conservation Network, is an 18-county region. And so we can see that in some counties, we've done a phenomenal job of seeing land conservation keep pace or even go beyond the rate of development. But at the same time, we've seen many counties that have seen very little success in terms of permanent land conservation. And so we hope this will be a tool for elected officials, for community leaders, and for landowners interested in seeing more of the Texas Hill Country put aside for future generations. So this kind of transitions very nicely into looking at some of our water resources as a region. And I'm going to hand it over to Jennifer Walker to talk about some of those metrics.
Thanks, Katherine. My name's Jennifer, and I'm very proud to serve as the vice chair of the Hill Country Conservation Network with this great group of folks. And I'm going to talk about water. Water is an integral part of the Hill Country fabric, and it is embodied in our rivers and springs that make the region special. It's also the single most limiting factor in the Hill Country. As Katherine mentioned, this region's population is growing rapidly, and with that growth comes a need for additional water to meet the needs of a growing population. I'm going to focus on 2 of the 3 water-related metrics that we covered in the report: water consumption and spring flow. When considering water consumption, the big takeaway from the study is that while consumption per person varies considerably across the region, it increasingly exceeds what is available from traditional surface and groundwater supplies. Current use patterns severely threaten the region's aquifers and ecosystems. However, this is not an impossible problem to solve, and there are solutions available. The metric that we looked at to understand water supply pressures is per capita water consumption, or GPCD. For this metric, you take the total water use in a community and divide it by its population. You can see from this map the wide variation in water use. There are several factors that may lead to a higher GPCD in one community over another, but the one thing that is clear is that we have a big opportunity and responsibility to focus on reducing per capita water use where possible for the good of the region. The good news is that we have tools to reduce water use through water conservation and efficiency. These tools are well known and are being used with great success in cities like San Antonio. And we can learn from our peer communities and put programs in place to put a real dent in our water use. We can also develop additional supplies by making use of sources of water in our communities that we do not traditionally count as water supply. These include rainwater, AC condensate, stormwater, and treating and reusing wastewater. There are common sense solutions to meet our future water supply needs. These tools are part of a growing practice known as One Water or integrated water management, and we are very focused on these practices as a solution that will benefit the Hill Country. When I think about the future water supply for the Hill Country, I'm not just considering water for people in our communities, although that is very, very important. Our using water far in excess of what is available from our rivers and aquifers can imperil fish and wildlife habitat and impact natural resources and landscapes that make the Hill Country special and unique. This is not a future that many of us want to contemplate, but we have to take action today to avoid that outcome tomorrow. Next slide, Katherine. A note about this gallons per capita metric. It's a little hard to wrap your head around, so we have this great graphic. I'm sure folks are familiar from Winter Storm Uri with filling your bathtubs up with water. So our low per capita city, San Antonio, uses less than 2 bathtubs per day per person. That's not every individual using that much. That's how much the water use divided over the city with all the businesses and people. And then in Travis County, Travis County, they use about 11 bathtubs of water per day. And there's different factors that go into that, but you can see the wide disparity and the room for improvement and the communities that we can look to as examples. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to spring flow. Groundwater, springs, and streams are strongly connected in the Hill Country, and spring flow is a measurable indicator of the overall health of a region's water supply. The Hill Country was once known as a land of 1,100 springs. For this report, we focused on 4 iconic springs. Comal Springs, which is located in New Braunfels, San Marcos Springs, located at Spring Lake in San Marcos, Barton Springs in downtown Austin, and Jacobs Well in Wimberley. The first 3 springs are fed by the Edwards Aquifer, and Jacobs Well is an outflow of the Trinity Aquifer. In the Hill Country, there is a greater and more visible connection between groundwater and surface water than anywhere in Texas. Spring flow provides 30% of base flow to rivers. So what does that mean? When there's no rain and Hill Country rivers are still flowing, it's because of springs. That is where much of the flow of our rivers comes from. But our springs are in danger, and in some instances are requiring active management in order to preserve them. The main pressure impacting spring flow is increased usage due to population growth and changing water use patterns. Much of this region relies on groundwater as a primary source of water supply, and some areas are currently planning for drawdown of aquifers to meet that demand rather than sustainable use. That will lead to problems for water supply, springs, and rivers in the future. Increased water use translates to lower water tables in our aquifer, and lower water tables mean lower spring flow. We can see this play out at Jacob's Well, which is located in Wimberley. This spring ran dry for the first time in recorded history in the early 2000s and has stopped flowing 3 times since then. The recent creation of the Jacob's Well groundwater management zone has established policies to manage pumping during drought and to limit new production in order to protect that spring. Community and agency collaboration prioritizes protecting land in the recharge zone and supporting development practices that reduce the use of the Trinity Aquifer. One of the best known examples of that, a showcase really, is the One Water School in Wimberley that many of you have probably heard of. In the Edwards Aquifer, Barton Springs, San Marcos, and Kamal Springs have habitat conservation plans in place that are designed to preserve their flows and protect the species that depend on keeping these springs flowing. These efforts are large in scope, and they involve the community and many agencies. And these efforts require a big investment, not only of resources, people resources, but also financial resources. These protective measures are a positive thing, but also a sign of the pressures on our aquifers and the resulting impacts on springs, people, and wildlife. Protecting water supplies, spring flow, and creek flow are linked. Each influences each other. Sustainable policies for land and water require forethought and collaboration. These efforts will benefit all of us. And this is really what the metrics report is about, is understanding these indicators and then giving us a framework within which to take action. So what the State of the Hill Country report tells us is that we have a number of natural systems that are feeling the pressure. Soon we'll reach the point where the impact of the harm makes it impossible to recover. However, there are ways to grow and flourish as a region while protecting these vital resources. Our next 2 speakers will talk about what they're doing in their communities to ensure a bright future and how we can learn from them and pitch in either in their communities or in our own communities. We are very excited to have practitioners that have worked alongside the network for many years. And I want to go ahead and pass it on to Commissioner Lonchell from Hays County and hear what they have to say. And thank you all very much.
Thanks, Jennifer. And also just take a moment to thank the network and the work that they've done and all of those member entities that have worked so hard. We appreciate not only the work that's been done on the State of the Hill Country, but also what's been done continually for years, and I know will be done for years to come. So thank you all, and thank you for organizing this. It's an honor to be part of this. Kind of touching on some of those impacts and stresses that Jennifer just mentioned, I think for Hays County's perspective, I'm going to start with groundwater, specifically supplies of groundwater. As most of you know, Hays County, Western Hays County is mainly developed on the back of our local groundwater. I like to think of, our last drought, for instance. Let's look back to 2010, 2012. Look at the county's population back then, which is a little over 10 years ago now, and think about where that population is today. Sometimes I use the statistic of what the value of Hays County was in 2010 compared to 2020 to use that. Back in 2010, if you added up all the properties in Hays County, the property values on our tax roll, it was about $10 billion. In 2020, that reached $20 billion. So for the most part, I like to think that Hays County doubled in that 10-year period of time. And thinking of the drought we experienced 2010, 11, going into 12, if we were to experience a similar drought today, I know we would have emergencies all across Western Hays County related to water supply. I think that's one of the things to point out that's extremely important to me. Not only does that groundwater supply the flow to our rivers and our creeks, but it also provides water to our homes and our businesses. And if we can't find ways to better manage that along with this growth, I could see some very hard times ahead when we do reach that next drought, which we all know eventually will happen. Water quality obviously is another stress that we're seeing from this demand. We've seen water treatment issues, the discharge into rivers and creeks, We're going to continue to see that as the growth occurs. One water program has been mentioned. I think that's a great plan, and very proud of that being put in place here in Hays County, especially with Wembley ISD at their new Blue Hole Elementary School. So something that we're looking forward to try to refine and finds ways that it can be further implemented, not just here in Hays County, but across the Hill Country region. Another thing that was mentioned earlier was county authority when it comes to growth in the ETJs, non-incorporated areas. We know that's been discussed for years at the legislature. I know it will be discussed for years to come. I think the challenges for us collectively in our region are to find ways that we can make those arguments and find reasonable ways in which we can start to have some say in how development occurs. I like to use the city of Dripping Springs as an example. It's a very small incorporated area, but a very large ETJ with a very growing population. Those challenges that the city is experiencing and the neighbors in those ETJ areas around Dripping Springs are experiencing has been growing and growing over time. Many consider Dripping Springs to be a suburb of Austin at this point, and we're seeing those issues. We're seeing those issues in wastewater. We're seeing the issues they're facing right now in a moratorium on development, and we're seeing those issues in groundwater supplies. So I believe what this State of the Hill Country has pointed out is right on for what we all need to be thinking about, not just as our Hill Country counties, but also our neighbors. I think it's one thing to keep in mind that the decisions that are made in these Hill Country areas also affect our neighbors to the east. Knowing, just looking at Hays County alone and our western part of the county compared to our eastern part of the county. And as development is made more difficult in the western part, which there are some natural reasons for that, whether it's habitat or groundwater, a lot of those stresses are then passed on to the eastern areas. And so I think it's important that we and our partners make sure that we include our eastern neighbors in some of these discussions, especially when we are talking with legislature about additional authorities in the unincorporated areas. And finally, Hays County's done a few things to try to address some of the challenges we're talking about. One are parks bonds and open space bonds. Our voters passed one in 2020, $75 million, which a large percentage of is going to conservation-minded projects. And another that the county has just recently taken on, which we call our conservation subdivision guidelines, trying to develop guidelines that developers will voluntarily follow that will result in the conservation of developable land, better use of water resources, and better ways of managing our wastewater. The county just kicked that off. We had our first presentation just a few weeks ago, and we'll be working more specifics, but very much looking forward to that. I do believe there is some hope, because I think a large percentage of the people that are moving to the Hill Country in Western Hays counties specifically come here because they want to be here, because it's a beautiful place. And I think they naturally will want to protect it, just like those of us that have been here for a while are doing too. So I do think there's a promise, and I think it's steps like this that'll get us to making some of those decisions and finding some solutions that will work in the benefit of not just us that are here now, but those that are coming in the future. Again, thank you all for letting me be part of this. I'm gonna turn it over to Carmen. Carmen, glad to have you with us.
Thank you so much, and thank you to the entire Hill Country Conservation Network and the Hill Country Alliance for bringing us into this. As the Honorable Lon Shell has mentioned, we are connected across this very large 17 county area, and GAVA, Go Austin, Vamos Austin, our organization, we fall on the eastern end, literally downstream from many of you in the Hill Country region. We're probably some of the newest members to this network and have just become brought into this work. And I want to talk about why. Because Go Austin, Vamos Austin is very hyper locally organizing in Austin, Texas, and specifically in 3 areas of Austin, Texas, and its eastern crescent, in North Austin, Southeast Austin, and South Austin. And in particularly in our Southeast Austin areas, while we started out looking at broad aspects of community health and engaging people in increasing opportunities for healthy living, we have also found that our communities are disproportionately impacted by a lot of these climate shocks and stressors, and also many of the strains and pressures on our infrastructure, these problems, these challenges that arise because of the rapid growth, and also because of many historic and systemic inequities that have placed certain populations in harm's way over and over again. And so as we've grown and expanded this work, and as we are also experiencing greater increases in demand on our water supply, increasing threats and stressors and shocks like Winter Storm Uri, like the floods, like our water systems being overtaken by heavy rains, we have been called into this work, into this climate resilience work, and also into conservation work because it is so overlapped. So because we are living downstream of so many others in the Hill Country, we are experiencing as community organizers grappling with all the things organizers deal with, we see that everything you all are doing upstream of us, everyone in Hayes County and beyond that works on water conservation, on land management, on responsible development, on looking at how to internalize those externalized costs of development on green fields. All of that work you all are doing has a cumulative impact. By the time the streams reach us, by the time Onion Creek reaches Southeast Austin, it's a river. It's not a creek, it's a raging river. By the time a funnel cloud in Driftwood, Texas dumps rain, and that rain flows down the streams, it becomes potentially catastrophic to those of us downstream. And while that's not directly tied to water conservation itself, it is tied and interwoven with so many decisions, everything from how we communicate across the region to each other in disasters, to how we look at our watershed, the health of our water tables, the different kinds of decision-making around infrastructure and development that each county, city, area that's unincorporated, each entity is going to make these decisions, and cumulatively, those have an impact on us. But I'm not here just to say that we're pleading that people take mercy on us downstream. We also want to recognize that what happens in Austin and in Central Texas on our end is also reverberating throughout the Hill Country. And it was absolutely named by all of you who mentioned the growth that's happening, especially the growth in our unincorporated areas that taxes water tables and aquifers. It may not be our water supply, but the changes that are happening in our industry, our local economy, and the shifting real estate market in Austin, Texas, is also sending waves of development in your direction, as well as former Austinites who have fled to the Hill Country in droves since our communities have changed so rapidly. And I'm not placing a judgment on any of it. It's more just for us to reckon with the patterns of growth, development, and migration that we're all experiencing, and to understand for us, we are educating ourselves within the city downstream to understand that one of the most effective things that can support us in stormwater management, flood mitigation, and reducing our risk actually has everything to do with land acquisition and conservation upstream. And while we may not be drinking from the exact same water supply, we are all connected to this regional water system that we have to be planning around comprehensively. And I can tell you that our people, having experienced now 4 boil water advisories in the last 4 years, people are paying attention. There are various reasons that we're experiencing it, but it's opening people's minds to really asking these questions about how are we looking at our critical water supply as a region, and how are we looking at the decisions we make now and how those things reverberate in the years to come, given the kinds of climate shocks and stressors that we're experiencing. We're all dealing with this pressure of growth, and we're all feeling the cause and effect. All of that talk about the base flow and our spring flows, these sacred sites, which I would be remiss if I didn't say that, these sites, Jacob's Well and Barton Springs, and all of these incredible phenomena of our topography in Central Texas have been sacred to people for as long as people have been on this continent, for as long as these geological formations have fed spring water to the land and to the people in this region. And these geological phenomena, they carry all kinds of patterns with them. They carry all kinds of information that has been collected and has been shared for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And I say that because these systems have experienced shocks and stressors all along the way. And maybe there wasn't the same level of highway traffic and suburban development back then that there is now. But these systems have always found ways to rejuvenate themselves, adapt, and recuperate. That's part of how this ecosystem contains itself and extends itself beyond any climate shock and stressor. And so I say that because that knowledge is integrated into the land and people of this region. And it's not just to feel good, it's from a practical standpoint of how can we actually start banding together. And from every corner that we come from, whether we are engineers in an urban environment or we are dry farmers who know the watersheds and humidity and soil moisture like the back of our hand out in the hill country, we have to be networking and sharing information so that we can leverage and maximize our decision-making power in a way that is going to ensure our safety and sustainable growth and development in the years to come. Thanks so much for making us part of this network so we can do it together.
Fantastic, Carmen. Thank you so much. Commissioner Schell, thank you for being here. Jennifer, thank you for all your hard work on this, this report. I think we're gonna move into a question and answer period here. So we save lots of time for that. I would encourage you to submit your questions through the Q&A function, and Leah Cuddyback with the Hill Country Alliance is gonna help moderate and facilitate that conversation. Before we get into that though, I would be remiss if I just didn't highlight one more time, especially given the wonderful insights that Commissioner Schell and Carmen have shared, that there is real risk that is highlighted in this report, that if we continue in a business as usual development pattern, we are at risk of doing irreparable harm to the natural resources and the character of the Hill Country and the future of our economies, of our environment, of the quality of life that we all enjoy in Central Texas. But what I love about what we've also highlighted is that there is a better way forward, that there are creative solutions out there. There are ideas that are really catalyzed when we come together, like the efforts of the Texas Hill Country Conservation Network. And we are really here to be a resource to each of you in your own communities to help identify those opportunities and those creative solutions. So I just wanted to make sure we ended on that positive note. I also want, I know we did a little bit of a thank you in the beginning, but I want to give a shout out to some of the key folks that have really driven the creation of this report, the hosting of this webinar. And so I'll just first say that the report really was a long and multi-year effort on behalf of Siglo Group, who is the primary author on the report. But Louis Bond was another incredible addition in the writing and the final pulling together of things. So thank you to those two. John Rooney is our Texas Hill Country Conservation Manager, Network Manager, and he has been working on this long hours, long days for the past several months. So thank you, John. Karen Ford with Water PR has been incredibly helpful in creating the beautiful graphics and visuals and messaging around the report. And Leah Cuddyback, who I know we'll be hearing from as she pulls up questions for us, has also been instrumental in making this a success. I also saw that we had a number of elected officials on the call today, and I'm sure I'm going to miss someone. So if you are an elected official who I don't call out, please feel free to use the chat or the question and answer to say hello. But thank you to Commissioner Walt Smith from Hays County for joining us, Commissioner Durden from Kendall County, Commissioner Ann Howard from Travis County, Commissioner Inglesby from Hays County. Thank you all so much for being here. I also really want to say thank you to Mayor Pro Tem from Bandera, Rebecca Gibson, and City Council Member Connie Barron from Blanco. The solutions to these challenges are really going to be driven at the local and regional level, and having strong leadership from our elected officials is an immense help to that end. So thank you all for being here. Okay. Let's move into the question and answer. Leah, do you want to kick us off here?
Yeah, so I think, Katherine, you started to talk a little bit about some of the broader network of partners involved in bringing this report together. I think, having you and Jennifer give us the context of that report was really helpful at the beginning. Can you tell us a little bit more about how the Texas Hill Country Conservation Network is broader than just the Hill Country Alliance or Texas Living Waters Project or GAVA or Hays County?
Sure, I'm happy to kick that off, and then Jennifer or anyone, if you want to chime in. The Texas Hill Country Conservation Network was an initiative that really came together more than 5 years ago now, thanks to some research that was funded by the Cynthia and George Mitchell Foundation and run through the Wimberley Valley Watershed Association. And those two organizations and dozens more began meeting on a regular basis to create a shared strategic plan and to scale our ambition for conservation in the region. So the network now has 10 steering committee members. That is 10 individuals from different organizations and universities across our region that are committed to being the governing body of the network. We have 30 formal network partners who have signed a resolution in support of the goals and objectives of the network, spanning the full 18-county region. And then beyond that, our full network includes more than 50 nonprofit partners, universities and agencies who attend network functions, who share ideas and solutions. And so it's really helped amplify the need for conservation in our region and the impact that our organizations are having, not just to a Texas audience, but beyond to a national audience. Jennifer, did I miss anything there?
No, that's a great description. I'll only add that all these folks that you mentioned, all the organizations, we meet in working groups and talk these issues through, many of which are outlined in the report, and really work collectively to try to level up our impact. The collaboration is key. None of us are going to solve these issues on our own.
Awesome. Well, thanks, y'all. Another question that has kind of come up from Commissioner Don Durden. I'm going to mark that we're answering this one live. Commissioner Durden asks, regarding water and spring flow, much of the rainfall that falls on Kendall County runs off rather than recharging our aquifers. I think it would be helpful if we could enhance our natural recharge patterns and improve or sustain spring flow. I suspect this is true in other counties in the region. Do either of y'all care to answer that?
Yeah, I'll just say that land management is key to the health of our region, to the sustainability of our water resources, to recharging aquifers, to ensuring the health of our riparian areas, the areas that run along our creeks and rivers. And so the network has been working hard on identifying new ways of reaching landowners to enhance that aquifer recharge, to enhance riparian health, as well as new funding mechanisms, because a big challenge for Hill Country landowners is getting ways to help pay for some of those good stewardship activities. And so the network has been a part of applying for grant programs like the Regional Conservation Partnership Program that's run out of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. The Hill Country Conservancy was the lead nonprofit organization in kicking off that grant effort, which brought $5 million of resources directly to landowners in the northern portion of the Hill Country. And then a brand new initiative that the Hill Country Alliance and 40 other partners, including many of our network partners, are a part of is the recently announced Sentinel Landscape designation that will also bring new financial resources to help landowners accomplish their stewardship goals. That designation is for the area around Camp Bullis. So Commissioner Durden, that would be a good one for some of your landowners in Kendall County to look into for enhancing that stewardship. It's a big challenge though, and a big project.
Awesome. Well, I've had a ton of questions flood in, so I'm going to go ahead and ask another one.
Okay, I'll be more succinct in responding.
And I'll also just mention, if panelists, while you're on here, if you want to check the Q&A, if you see something, you can start typing an answer. I'm not sure we're going to be able to get to everything live. If we don't get to everything live, we will be following up after this webinar and sharing a recording and also answering any questions we don't cover. So I've got a question here from Elizabeth McGreevy. She says, I was working on a development just outside Dripping Springs that was supposed to be an amazing green sustainable development. They were about to hire me to put together a Dripping Springs conservation management plan until they found out it was not required. So they decided not to have me do it. Is it possible, or could you provide tax incentives to encourage developers to produce this plan? Otherwise, management will continue to end up with the mow and blow crews.
That seems like a good one for Commissioner Schell. How do you incentivize good development where you have few requirements for good development?
It's a great question, and it's part of our conservation subdivision guidelines that we've developed, and Commissioner Smith, who's on this call, who represents a large portion of Western Hays County as well, was integral in that. That question came up very early on. If we don't have the authority to require something that we believe is important to all of our citizens, how can we get someone to do it? And I think there's one thing we can all agree on, that it would be ideal if we could. And one goal we had was, how could you conserve 50% or more of the developable space that's being developed? Understanding the expense, the cost of land in the Hill Country, we know there is an incentive for someone that invests in it to maximize the return on every square foot of that. That is I think that's fairly logical. So the question is, how do you incentivize someone not to do that with limited authorities and obviously limited funding? Some things we've investigated are speeding up the process for development, understanding there is a huge cost to developers and time, especially in the world that we're currently living in. Is there a way that local governments could offer a more streamlined approach or path to development that would save developers time and eventually save them money, if they would be willing to conserve some open space, use rainwater, do some improved wastewater treatment, reuse, et cetera. So that was one that came up. One was also to create designations similar to LEED, something like silver, gold, platinum, something that someone could advertise. Again, trying to leverage what I think is a positive is that the individuals that are moving to the Hill Country are coming here because they want to be here, and it's a beautiful place. They want to raise their families. They want to work here. They want to enjoy the dark skies. They want to enjoy the rivers and the creeks. And so I think we have this audience that's moving here that would want to participate in something that they believe is going to protect their investment in this beautiful place. And so offering developers to advertise that they have met the qualifications to be some level of a conservation subdivision, I think would go somewhere. And we get into financial incentives. One that we did contemplate were public and improvement districts. We understand the cost to finance, especially privately financed development, is a significant portion of the cost of the overall development. PIDs have been used to reduce that cost by the PID bonds, which oftentimes have a lower interest rate than what developers are paying their private partners or the private market. Would we offer the use of a PID to a developer if in turn that developer would then conserve at least 50% of the developable space and do some, maybe it's clustering of development and density in certain areas, and then preserving open space, maybe preserving endangered species habitat, recharge areas, et cetera. And so that's one financial incentive. It's sort of a secondary financial incentive that we've identified. And then there are also is the opportunity to use 380 for cities or Chapter 381 for counties, which are tax incentives. That is something that relatively is not used for development. Tax incentives are usually associated with commercial development and job growth. However, there could be some ways that they would be used in this scenario, as well as tax increment financing. We've seen TERSs used before for the infrastructure development of neighborhoods and subdivisions. That could also be an incentive, again, looking at the cost of financing for infrastructure. If a county or a city were to say, we would allow you to finance the cost of certain of these infrastructures, especially green infrastructure, maybe we would allow you to use that future tax growth on those residents that are investing in your development. So those are some of the ideas that we're contemplating, and we're kind of crunching the numbers on to see how they work. We have had a great interest from developers in the development community and trying to understand what this is. And we've heard from a lot that said they'd like to be some of the first ones to try it, because I believe they do see the benefit as being good stewards of the land in which they're developing, and making sure that those that move here and buy their homes can appreciate how that was done. So I think that's a great question. I think it's something that counties are going to be working on in the future, and it's going to be very important to how we're able to develop in the future.
Excellent. I'm going to say we've got about 10 minutes left, so just being mindful of time. I've got a question from Bill Neiman, and this one says, howdy, we're calling in from the headwaters of the Llano. Been meeting on these issues all morning today. We note that Llano flow is a very significant part of Austin's water supply, but we struggle out here to manage the river's health. We have wastewater issues and other development issues. How can Austin help Western rural communities stewarding the water supply? And Carmen, I'd love for you to pitch in here, since I know you mentioned that a lot of GAVA's work goes upstream. So I'll be quiet now and let you chime in.
Oh, thanks. Sure. Well, a lot of our work goes figuratively upstream in terms of addressing root causes of some of the issues we face. But this is new for us to be reaching literally upstream to some of our neighbors who are grappling with this. So I really appreciate the question, because as many know, it was the Llano River that overtook some of our filtration systems with silt a few years back and put us all in a boil water advisory situation, many of us for the first time. And so I think that question is incredibly important, and I am not entirely sure what the answer is, except that I do know one thing we can do is share a tremendous amount of data that we have here, simply the data associated with the consequences of those irregularities and those stresses on our system, but also the patterns of what we're seeing. You know, we are in the Atlas 10 corridor, I'm sorry, the Atlas 14 corridor along I-10, the entirety of the I-10 corridor across the state, and it cuts through part of us too in the Hill Country. We're experiencing these increased rainfall patterns. And so at the local level, our municipal folks and at the community level, we are collecting data because we know that it's not actually sufficient. We're looking at historical rainfall data and how that's interacting with our development patterns and wastewater management and stormwater management. But we're barely scratching the surface in terms of preparing for what is now happening and what's to happen. And so it's very daunting, but we do have a lot of stakeholders talking about it, and there's data and compelling information that I think folks in our city can share with our neighbors upstream, so that you all can make more informed decisions about the reverberations and also what initial steps are being taken.
I'd like to respond to Bill's question. It's a really good one, and something for us, you know, being kind of future focused and how can we look outside of our communities for holistic solutions. He brings up a very good point. The Llano River contributes a good amount of flows into Lake Travis and the Highland Lakes, which are water supply for Austin and many communities surrounding them. So while most of the region relies on groundwater, there is this portion to the east that relies on surface water. And you know, what Bill's calling out there is source water protection and making investments far beyond, well, not that far, but far beyond our communities in collaboration with those communities in order to protect water supply, but also to help those regions make the investments that need to be done in order to protect their local resources as well. It's all connected together. So it's not just a parochial, like we're protecting our water supply, but it's really looking holistically at the communities in the same watershed and how can we support each other. You know, some communities have more resources than others, and how can we spread that around for the benefit of all? I think that's a great question, Bill. Thanks for asking.
I will chime in that Tom Hegemeyer also asked a very similar question. He references counties having limited authority to manage new development, and that appears to be the largest threat to Hill Country land and water. Small local governments like the one out in Junction covering that part of the Llano that Bill is referring to, you know, they also have limited development management rules and resources. Maybe just off the top of your head, Jennifer or Lon, as a county commissioner, you may have something to add. What steps can be taken to equip and empower those local governments to manage new development and protect water quality, manage flooding, enhance water supplies?
Well, I'll respond and pass it over to Lon because he probably has some more specific response, but I really loved hearing from Lon about the things that they're exploring, the creative ways to encourage development, you know, that is lighter on the land and our water supply in Hays County. I think those kinds of creative solutions are really important. And I also think one of the things about the network is if we can get everyone collectively, all the groups and the people and the elected leaders in this region to really work together. I know we work together on many things, but to work in a really coordinated fashion, maybe we can solve some of these issues that are impeding progress. That's part of the reason that we were so interested in the network is this collective action to move things forward. So we have to change some laws and some regulations, but we also have to get really creative in our approaches and know what we're working towards, which is protecting our land, protecting our water supplies, protecting our springs and our habitat, and continuing to have it be a lovely place for all of us to live and raise our kids and our families in. And I'll pass it over to Lon.
I'll spend just about a minute. And, you know, in addition to, I think, you know, some of the things we mentioned about just conservation and the incentivizing conservation, Jennifer did mention, you know, laws. And I think something that is really positive about this is the bringing together of not just the Hill Country, but those that also are impacted by development in the Hill Country. And I think having Carmen on here is a great example of that, because when we go to the legislature, and it's obviously been done before, and Hill Country counties have unified before and asked for certain types of authorities, and whether those were the right ones or the wrong ones, we have to keep continuing to work on how best to solve that problem. But I think something we can do to make a greater impact is to bring our neighbors into this discussion as well, understanding that they are also impacted by decisions that are made in the Hill Country counties. And I think that's that next step that we can take to have those truly positive discussions that are impactful and productive with our legislatures and those that work in that industry, in that big granite building in Austin, to help us understand the problems, not just that we're facing, but the ways that we're addressing those problems is impacting our neighbors and the rest of the state of Texas. Whether you want to start in Hays County and think about our impacts to the east, but also the impacts all the way down to the coast. So I think that's something that we should use to leverage what we've started here, and what's happened with the development of this report is to take that and leverage that to gain more partners, not just those within the Hill Country, but those are impacted by the development in the Hill Country.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I'm gonna rush through a couple questions in one, since we're at about 3 minutes left. And we had a question from David K. Langford asking if any farmers or ranchers were involved in putting this report together. He notes that most of the private lands in the Hill Country are private working lands, where much of the ecological benefits originate. So in addition to answering whether farmers or ranchers were involved in this report, we had a question about night skies, and we didn't really get to night skies, but night skies are covered in the report. So how do night skies and farmers and ranchers play into this report from the network?
Yeah, maybe I'll jump in on that one and say absolutely, farmers, ranchers, and landowners are a critical part of the Hill Country Conservation Network and were a critical part of the formation of this report. And we recognize that without the close coordination with private landowners, that we can't get much done because they really are stewarding all of the natural resources that trickle down into the recharge of our aquifers, into the spring flow that sustains creeks and rivers, into the clean air that we breathe and the wildlife habitat that sustains all the other critters that enjoy the hill country. So such an important part of our landscape. On the night skies, I wanted to say that that is just a phenomenal issue to focus on. That is another bellwether for the change in development in our region, is the loss of the view of the stars at night. And the hill country is very fortunate to be located kind of on the edge of what is an otherwise very illuminated map of the United States. So the I-35 corridor really is a curtain to the east of which you see a lot of outdoor lighting that mars the view of the Milky Way at night, and to the west of which there still is vast areas of relative darkness that allows us to see those stars clearly. The International Dark Sky Association once said that the Texas Hill Country has more work happening to protect our view of the night sky than any other similarly sized geography in the entire world. And so this is a fun issue to work on because it's an issue, it's a matter of public education and awareness, and it's one that literally can be changed overnight. And it's not a matter of saying no outdoor lights. It's a matter of putting in outdoor lights that are shielded, that are pointed in the direction that they need to go rather than upward and illuminating the night sky. So it's a really fun issue. We are fortunate in the hill country to have 68% of the hill country still has excellent views of the night sky. And our effort, our hope is through the network, we can maintain that current level.
Wonderful. And we're at time. I think it's still worth asking this one final question. This report covers so much important information. As you can tell, we've gone to our full time limit here, and we didn't even get in deep on all 8 of the metrics outlined in the report. So, with that in mind, if you were to distill this report down to one message, what would it be? And Jennifer or Katherine, take a stab at that one.
Cool, I'm happy to take a stab to say the one message, the key takeaway, and I'm gonna do a 2-part answer. We are growing like crazy as a region, and the pressures are being felt and having an impact on our natural resources, on our rural communities, on our working ranch lands. We are seeing the impact of that growth. But the flip side of that is there are creative ways that we can continue to grow that protect those natural resources. We have the tools, we have the ideas, the best practices. We can grow as a region, as we know we will, while protecting our land, our water, our communities, and our night skies. I think the Texas Hill Country Conservation Network is an excellent vehicle for individuals, landowners, nonprofits, community leaders to get connected to some of those creative ideas. And if at the very least, if we don't have the creative idea, we can connect you to the folks like Commissioner Schell or Carmen or others who really are spearheading some innovative efforts in their own communities.
And I'll just add, one of the things that really stands out to me is, and we've got it well represented on the screen here today and with the participants, is we have urban areas and rural areas and this region that we've defined. And we have a lot to learn from each other and a lot of support that we can give each other and working through these issues. No one is doing it perfectly, but we've all got a piece to contribute to it. I know Carmen and I are focused mostly in Austin. We've got, Hays County and Comal County and San Antonio and all these regions that I've seen looking through the chat. And I think it's just a really great testament. So we're all peers. we have a lot that we can contribute to our collective success. And I think that that is also a big takeaway from this report. And what it does is it gives us some guideposts and some things to, try to measure progress from, because it's helpful to, have something like that. But we just, collective effort, I think is a real takeaway here.
All right, I want to, since I think we need to wrap, just thank our panelists one more time. We can do a Zoom style. Thank you so much, Carmen, Commissioner Schell, Jennifer, Leah, thank you for your coordination. Thank you to the Mitchell Foundation, who really ran all the logistics, and you wouldn't believe the behind the scenes that goes into a webinar. So thank you so much to Farnaz and Emily from the Cynthia and George Mitchell Foundation. I also, since I put a call, and I'm so excited that we had several other elected officials. Thank you, Commissioner Kevin Webb from Comal County. He may have had to drop off. Thank you to Greg Maxton, the mayor of Fair Oaks Ranch. Appreciate you being here. Thank you to Roman Garcia, City of Kerrville City Council, and Clint Hayes. Thank you from Bulverde. We appreciate you being here today. To the folks in Junction and Comfort and all over the Hill Country, I think the value of coming together is sometimes it feels like we fight our own individual battles and have our own struggles in our own communities based on growth and natural resource issues. And it's helpful to see that these are regional problems and that we can really come together in a regional way to address them. And so to that point, I know someone put in the chat a mention of a TCEQ petition that's happening right now around wastewater and that issue, especially as it relates to our pristine Hill Country rivers and creeks. So I would encourage you, if you scroll through the chat, to find a link to comment on a potential rule change at the TCEQ to make that a little less of a problem in the Texas Hill Country and across the state. So thank you again for everyone who made today possible. Thank you for joining us. I'll go ahead and put our starting slideshow up just one more time so you all can see contact information for some of the staff affiliated with today's event and the link to see the full Texas Hill Country State of the Hill Country report. Thank you all.